Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Joanna and this is Joanna Budgets. We're not going to talk about budgeting today. I look like a hot mess, as you can tell. I have been sick. So hopefully I can get through this without too much trouble. As many of you know, if you've watched my videos, you know that February 17th, 2024 was a life-changing, life-altering day. On February 17th, 2024, my brother-in-law was shot with a 20-gauge shotgun loaded with birdshot in the front yard of my niece's home. The night before, there was an altercation between my niece and her then boyfriend, resulting in her wanting to move her things out of her home. So on February 17th, 2024, myself, my son Kipton, met my mother at her home, where I met up with my mother in her pickup truck and my daughter with her then 3-month-old son and 3-year-old son in her pickup truck. We caravanned to meet my niece and my brother-in-law at a gas station close to her home. None of us had ever been to her home. And therefore we didn't know where we were going. And so we just met up at the gas station and we were all going to go with our big, huge vehicles and help her move her and her 4 children out. We met my niece and her 4 children, my brother-in-law, his 2 sons, his fiance, and his puppy at this gas station. He was in his truck. My niece was in her small SUV. We met up and we followed her down this long gravel driveway to her home. We all pulled into the driveway and she went up and tried to gain access to her home to get stuff done or to get her stuff out, and the doors were locked and she couldn't get her key to work. She was locked out of her home, illegally evicted from her home. She retreated from the porch along with my brother-in-law because he had gone to the porch to help her, assist her with getting the door open. There was nothing, there wasn't anything violent going on in that moment. I remember them coming down off the porch and my niece getting on the phone immediately to call the police so that she could gain access to her home to get her belongings because she was afraid of this man and wanted to be out of his life. So at one point, everybody started picking up bicycles. Not everybody. Several people started picking up bicycles and putting them in the back of my brother-in-law's truck so we could just get that out of the way until the police got there. We were waiting for the police. John had come out and said something, and I remember that he came out and said something. I don't remember what he said, but I do remember because I was standing there talking to my brother-in-law, and I remember turning around and looking. I didn't really see him. Don't remember seeing, like what he wore or anything like that. It was just kind of a glance over him, like, kind of rolled my eyes, like, what in the hell is this guy saying? He said, I don't know what he said. And then he went back in the house. So I thought that He understood the police were on the way because my niece was on the phone with the police. We all knew that she had called the police. So I was just under the assumption that everything was okay because the police were on their way. My son was still in the car. I walked to the car. I had to go to the bathroom. I knew I wasn't going to get in that house anytime soon to use the restroom. So I found a place behind a barn and went to the restroom. I went to my vehicle before that happened and got my son. And I told my son, you can go out and find your cousin and you guys can hang out. I'm going to go use the restroom. I'll be right back. As I'm back there in the bathroom, relieving myself, I started hearing voices and screaming. And I had no idea what was going on. It doesn't sound like it was like somebody having fun. And so I walk back down past my niece's car and I look to my left. John Moore is standing on the porch. Shotgun. What appears to be straight out. And I was like, oh crap, that doesn't look good. In my head. I was at the front of my Yukon XL. And by the time it took me to get from the front of my Yukon XL to the driver's side door, I then heard a big, huge pop. He'd shot the gun. I remember thinking, I really hope in that moment, I remember thinking, oh God, that was a warning shot. He wants us to leave, right? He didn't want to wait for the police. And then I hear, you shot my dad, you shot my dad, you shot my dad. There was women screaming and kids screaming and chaos ensued. And I found my child and my nephew in the back seat of the car. I found out recently during the trial that my mother had actually grabbed them and put them in the back seat of my car. I didn't know that until recently. You'll have to excuse my dog barking. Let me go get her. So she'll shut up. So anyway, I remember walking around the back of my car and seeing my brother-in-law laying on the ground. I remember hearing my nephew screaming. He was 18 at the time. I remember hearing him scream and start walking towards the house like he was going to take matters into his own hands, right? He just witnessed his dad get shot, and so I remember jumping in front of him, body checking him basically, and pushing him back saying, get the F back in the truck, get the F back in the truck, don't you come back out, don't you come back out. It took everything I had. He's taller than I am, but he's super skinny. I'm a big girl. It took everything I had to get him back into the car. Shh, guys, you are annoying. So after that, I remember. Shh. Pause. Okay. Anyway, dogs are crazy. Where was I? I know that when I was body checking my nephew back into the car or the truck, I know that John was standing on the porch. I remember running over while John was still on the porch to assist, and I probably have talked about some of this. I don't know if I've gone into detail, and I know I promised in another video that I wasn't going to talk about it anymore, but you're going to find out why in about 5 minutes. So hang on. There's some very interesting news that you're going to learn at the end of the video. So listen. and watch and find out. I ran over and knelt behind my brother-in-law. He was about 30 feet away from the front porch in the middle of the yard in front of a tree. And I knelt down in front of him and I looked at his fiance. Him and my sister had been estranged for quite some time. And so he had moved on, and so had my sister. And we lovingly joke now that they're sister wives. But I knelt behind my brother-in-law and I looked at Laura and I said, or his fiance, and I said, what can I do to help? And she goes, I don't know. And I just remember as she was looking and observing, and she's in the medical field. Labor and delivery, medical field type stuff. I don't know exactly. I know she said it, and I suck. My memory is terrible right now. Then she looked, she pulled his shirt up, and you just saw all these red dots all over his body. He was bleeding from his mouth and his nose, and I remember pulling up the back of his shirt. To look for exit wounds, and there weren't any exit wounds. I remember hearing my niece on the phone with dispatch and trying to, her trying to tell them what was happening. And I remember watching my niece shake uncontrollably. It had been snowing that day. And it was cold. So I got up and I ran off to look for blankets or coats or whatever, because she'd taken her hoodie off to put underneath his head. And I eventually found some moving blankets to drape over her and my brother-in-law out of my daughter's car. And so I ran over there and I brought the blankets, and I think they ended up just putting the blankets on my brother-in-law. So anyway, at some point, John had retreated back into the home. And I, walked around many times, looking for my, checking on my child. I know that when the first time I saw him, I told him and my nephew that if they saw that gun, come back down, get reloaded, point towards something else, they get to the lowest part of the floorboards and hide and don't come back out. I told them not to leave that vehicle. The fortunate part was they were probably safe from harm if he just shot that way, because there was another vehicle in between them and him. However, in that vehicle, between him and them, was my 2 grandsons. So it didn't matter. The tragedies that could have happened, on top of the tragedy that already happened that day, are astounding. So anyway, I remember going and checking on my niece's kids. All 4 of them were in her vehicle in front of my vehicle. They were all in hysterics. They didn't understand what was happening. They thought their mom was dead. I remember walking up to my mother at the end of right behind my daughter's truck, and grabbing my mother's hands. She was 70 years old at this point. And saying that could have been my dad. Because my dad, I thought for sure he was going to go that day too, but he decided to stay home, and I wish I'd left my son with him, because then he would have not had to have watched that happen. So anyway, fast forward to the police came. They detained John Moore and put him in the back of a police cruiser, and everything else that followed was just, getting my brother-in-law to safety and getting him to the hospital, and then him being transferred into a trauma hospital, and then 5 days later he passes away. They had to withdraw care because his body was dying and there was nothing anybody could do. And then, throughout this last year, we've been tormented and harassed by the family. And we've rebutted. I'm not going to lie. We've rebutted. We have tried to say, no, 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 this is not true. The best that we could, because, there was only so much that we could say in that moment. John had 5 charges on him to start with, and one of them had something to do with weapons under disability, because the probability of him being drunk that day was high. There were alcohol cans everywhere in the home, and was clearly documented by the police officers. But they never did a blood test. And I wish they had. So that, during the trial, which the trial was January 13th through the 16th of 2025. So it was about, 20 days ago that we've got the verdict. And through that trial, I learned a bunch of stuff. I saw a bunch of stuff that I didn't know about. But I think what happened, so then on the 16th, the jury came back and found him not guilty. At some point in the trial, they had dropped the charge of weapons under disability. There wasn't enough because they didn't do the breathalyzer or whatever. They dropped that charge. And then the jury on the 16th found John Moore not guilty on all other counts. And the reason why is because John Moore expressed his fear of my brother-in-law. He said that there was a conversation between him and my brother-in-law, and my brother-in-law said that he would, if you hurt my daughter, I will you. Kind of like what most fathers do. So, dear fathers, stop saying that to men. Because these men these days, they ain't like they used to be. So, and then on the day that it happened, my brother-in-law had texted John Moore and said, which I didn't know this going into any of this. I didn't know that there was a text message. I didn't know there was beef or whatever you want to call it. And later on it did come out that there really wasn't any beef. That was the only thing that was, said in disdain or whatever you want to call it. It was just, a dad protecting his daughter. He did send him a text message that said, you remember that conversation that we had? And because of that text message, it proved John was telling the truth about the prior threat, even though no one had ever heard it. And then because there was no breathalyzer, also they had not done the proper gathering of evidence. So, like when you see in the CSI type shows where they have the little yellow cones or whatever they put next to all of the evidence, they didn't categorize or take photos of all of the evidence in that manner. So they dropped the ball on that. The prosecution wasn't able to get a expert witness to say how far away Joe was from the porch when he was shot. He had a 12.5 by 12.5 inch space on his upper torso area that was affected by the birdshot. It hit every single organ in his body. He died from multiple organ failure because that birdshot killed all of his organs. Sorry, there's a whole lot going on right now. But, they didn't get an expert witness to prove how far away he was from the porch. And in the body cam footage, John, when they pull him from the house, John says, as he's standing on the porch, he made it to right here. There were 5 people. 5 people that were there that day. 5 adults that were there that day. 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 5. 5 adults there that day that actually saw where he was standing. 2 children who saw where he was standing. The 5 adults, the children were not called on stand, thank goodness. The 5 adults all told the truth as to where I didn't see where he was standing because remember I was behind the car. All 5 adults testified to the fact that Joe was standing by that tree 30 to 35 feet away. At first we thought 20 feet. That was our guesstimate. I'm not a foot distance professional, so I couldn't tell you. But it ended up being measured 30 to 35 feet. I can't remember the exact measurement. My son even said that's where he was standing when he got shot. Standing with his hands up in the air. But John said I was afraid because of that text message and that prior conversation. John said this is where he stood when I shot him. He made it all the way to the porch. And then he said that my brother-in-law reached for his weapon. My brother-in-law had a legal concealed carry. He was 11 years prior military, who was injured or a wounded veteran because he was wounded on the job in the Army. He was on 100% disability for serving his country. Yes, he had his weapon on. I didn't know he had his weapon on. How did anybody know he had his weapon on? The only time when I found out he had his weapon on, he was already on the ground and complaining that it was hurting him. So it was removed from his person and placed to the side in a vehicle to keep it safe. And then given straight to the police when they arrived. He never drew the weapon. There's 5 people, 5 adults that said he never drew the weapon, never reached for the weapon. His hands were in the air. 2 children that say the same exact damn thing. This guy shot my brother-in-law and claimed self-defense and won. Because the investigation was done poorly. Because there wasn't enough evidence to prove otherwise. It was basically a he said, she said case. And the jury believed him over 5 other adults. Imagine that. So he was found not guilty on all 4 counts. There's nothing we can do about it. It is what it is. It's over. But then on February 2nd, 2025, 17 days after the jury said not guilty, and this man walks out on the streets free, on February 2nd at approximately 10:30 p.m., he was driving more than 100 miles an hour down a state route, drunk. Crossed left to center, and had a head-on collision with an EMT worker who was only 25 years old, killing this EMT worker instantly. The EMT worker was found dead on the scene. John had to be removed from his vehicle because he was trapped, sent to one hospital where they checked his injuries, and then sent him to the trauma hospital where my brother-in-law died almost 1 year ago. 17 days. He had a second chance, y'all. He had a second chance. And he threw it away. And he killed somebody else less than a year later. I am mad. I'm sad. When I saw the news, I cried. I got angry. It was so disturbing. I didn't even understand how it could be even real. I couldn't understand it. Nothing in my bones understood how it could be real. The justice system failed. Not just us. It failed us. Because if anything, he should have had, a lesser charge and still been in prison for a little while for some kind of punishment, because it wasn't self-defense. There was no stand your ground. There was none of that. Listen, if it were me and I was behind locked doors and nobody was trying to get in, I would just stand my ground inside my door where I was safe. I knew the police were on the way. The police told me to stay in the house. But I walked out and I shot somebody and killed them. 5 days later, they die? And that's self-defense? No, it's not. It's not. And if he'd have been found guilty of at least one of those charges, he'd have been in prison. And this 25-year-old EMT guy who was an angel to the county that he lived in and served, saving lives every single day. And this man took his life for a drink after being given a second chance to do better in life, raise his family, maybe have more family. He could have done so many things, been so many things, and he chose to be this. Hug your loved ones, because you never know. You just never know. And my heart hurts. It hurts. Hurts for the guy that died. Hurts for his family, because now they're going through exactly what we went through almost a year ago today. And I honestly feel bad for him and his family, John Moore's family and him, because now they have to do this again. And this time I just don't see how he can beat this one this time. And Lord help us if he does. He had a second chance. And he threw it out the window. His family is going to suffer immensely because he made stupid choices. For what? A beer? I don't get it. Hug your loved ones today, when you see this video. And I hope you made it to the end to hear the whole thing. There are so many more details that I could go into, but I didn't really want to have to talk about it anymore. But I felt it was necessary to talk about it again with this new development. So, as always, I love you, and I hope you all have a very blessed day. Bye, guys.